Alright, today we're going to talk about probability of simple events. Alright, so we're going to keep it simple to start when we're talking about probability. So probability is the big thing that we're talking about all chapter. Okay, and so right now we're getting it started with simpler stuff. Probability is just saying the chance that an event will occur. That's all probability is. Alright, so we're looking for that certain chance that something's going to happen. So we're looking for a certain outcome. Alright, so the outcome, that's what we're looking for, right? So this is the final occurrence, right? That's what our outcome is. So our probability tells us the chances that we could have a certain outcome, a certain final appearance, okay? So talk about something simpler. We could talk about, I have a basket of hats, okay? Or, you guys, you saw me on hat day, right? I have a bunch of hats. So we'll say I had 9 hats in a box, all right? They're all different. And so the question I could ask you is what's the probability that I would get the one orange hat? Alright, and so our probability comes down to this kind of simple looking fraction looking thing. Alright, so we have on the top, the numerator would be our number of favorable, which means what we're looking for, outcomes over the number of possible outcomes. Alright, so basically the possible here in the bottom is kind of like the whole. Our favorable outcomes is the part. So we're kind of looking at it, again, kind of like a fraction. So we have this part of all the outcomes that we want. So again, it's just a part over a whole, okay, which is kind of a lot of things that we've talked about over and over and over. In this situation, we're trying to get that one hat. So that would be our favorable outcome. And the possible outcomes would be 9. So we have a probability of 1/9 to be able to get that orange hat. Now, there are ways to also change this into decimals and fractions, which we've plenty talked about. If I were to change this into a decimal, it would be 1 repeated, right? And I could round that to basically just 1/10, but it's going to be 1/10 repeated. Okay, it could, as a percent, and we'll round it to the 10th place, 11 1/10%. Okay, so if I just move this decimal over twice, it means it's 11 1/10. So a probability can be expressed as a fraction, can be expressed as a decimal, and it can be expressed as a percent. And since we've been spending plenty of time converting between those three all last chapter, you should have no problem being able to make those kind of conversions. Now, another thing we talk about is like rolling a dice. Okay, so if I had a dice and it was 6-sided, the probability of me rolling a 6 so every single time I roll this dice, my probability would be 1/6. Right, and then if I were to convert that to a decimal, if we went through and did the division where we take 1 divided by 6, we would find that our decimal would be 1 or 16/100ths with the 6 being repeated, which we would round to about 17%. Okay? So when you're playing a dice game and you're thinking, I need a 6 right now, that is the likelihood that you'll get a 6. That is the likelihood that you would get any number on the dice. If you were looking for, so if you didn't want to go too far and you didn't want to go too small, so if you're trying to roll a 2, a 3, or a 4 on this dice, that means we have 3 possible outcomes. So our favorable outcomes are those 3 numbers. Out of a 6-sided die, we'll have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 that could all be possibilities. So it would be 3/6 is your probability, which we could reduce to 1/2, because just like in fractions, we can reduce that. So the probability of you getting a 2, 3, or 4 is 1/2, which again we can convert to decimal, which would be 5/10, which we could convert to a percentage, which would be 50%, because we have to move that decimal twice and make that invisible 0 appear. One thing that we could also talk about is the chances of you not rolling a 6. Okay, so this is what we call a complementary probability. It basically means the opposite of what you want. Okay, so the unfavorable events over the possible outcomes. So in this case, the unfavorable for rolling a 6 would mean that there are 5 other options that are not a 6. Right? We want the 6, but we have 5 options that are not the 6. So that means we would have 5/6 chance of not getting a 6, okay, which we then could convert to decimal, which we could convert to percentage, just like we did before. So 5/6 is what we're talking about when I'm talking about a complementary probability. Let's see. I believe we've covered everything we really need to know on here, so I think you guys are ready to continue working. There's one more thing I kind of want to bring up. So I know in the game of life there is a spinner, right? And generally our spinners are split into even amounts, right? Sometimes you get a slightly uneven amount, like something like that. Alright, and so let's just say this is the spinner. And so in here we have a 1 and a 5, but then you have 2, 3, 4. So you have a much better chance to get your 2 3s and 4s, a smaller chance for your 1 and 5. In this scenario, you could see that if I were to spin this, my 2, 3, and 4 all have equal probabilities, right? The 2 takes up 1/4 of the entire spinner. So there is a 1/4 chance, right? 1 out of 1, 2, 3, 4 spaces that large. Okay, so that means that I have a 25% chance, or 25/100ths probability, to roll a 2. The 1 here has a different probability. The 1 is split, it takes that 4th and it splits it in half. If I were to split each of these into half the same way, that would turn all of these into 8ths. And so there is 1 out of 8 possibilities for it to get in that small of a space. So for the 1, I would end up getting a 12.5% chance, or 125 thousandths possibility. So the probability for the 1 is different than the probability for the 2. Alright, so this is our probability for a 2, this is our probability for a 1. So as you can tell, it's much more likely for us to get a 2 than it would be to get a 1. Okay? Alright, I think that should be enough for you guys to work on your homework. If you do have any more questions, please make sure to ask.